My presentation is on Word Identification Strategy by Lexi Clifton. The strategy description. The word identification strategy is a way that students can learn how to learn new words that they may not have seen before. This is also a way for a student to be able to learn to be able to sound out words that they are struggling to sound out. This strategy also helps students to be able to increase their reading proficiency. The thinking skills that the student will get from this will be that they will be able to learn words without having to ask for help. This skill will also give the student confidence to be able to think about new words and try to learn them on their own. My source is the simku.edu. It is by Keith Lenz, Gene Shoemaker, Donald Dreschler, and Victoria Beals. The publication is University of Kansas, 1996. A way that this can apply to a specific learner is helping them recognize these words in a book and in everyday life. This will also help them retain them so they won't have to ask for as much assistance with reading. The implementation of word identification strategy part 1, pop quiz. The first step of teaching this skill that I would use would be to give the students a pop quiz to help me understand where they are in their learning. This would also help me be able to get a better understanding of how I can help them in class. Implementation of word identification strategy part 2, description. The strategy of word identification is a way to help students to be able to identify words and have a better ability to remember them. A way the strategy will benefit students will be to help them by being able to learn bigger words. For instance, the word information is a word some students with learning disabilities may struggle with to pronounce. Students will use this strategy to help them learn to read at a better proficiency. Implementation of word identification strategy part 3, modeling. A way that I will model this strategy is by using flashcards in a class to help students to be able to see words but also be able to memorize the word. I will put different words around the classroom to identify different objects for them to read. This will help me to be able to identify where the student is having trouble with pronunciation of words. Implementation of word identification strategy part 4, practice. A way that I would have the students practice the word by giving them a spelling sheet with the words on the paper. Then they would have to write and say the words as they write them. This would help them to be able to learn how to pronounce certain letters accurately. This would also give them more confidence because they would be able to know the different words that they were writing and reading. Implementation of word identification strategy part 5, giving feedback. A way that I would give the students feedback is by meeting with them individually and letting them know how well they did on their pop quiz. This way, the students would understand where they were struggling at and let them know that we are, as a class, will continue to work on this skill. I will also be giving them more time to be able to practice in class so they can improve on what they are learning. Implementation of word identification strategy part 6, final test. I will give my students a final test to see how far they have come with learning this learning strategy. After the test is finished, I will meet with the student individually the next day that they have class, and I will by then have the final test graded and will make sure that they can see their progress. I will also encourage them to continue with their practice skills that they have learned in class. Examples of word implementation strategy. The first example of word implementation strategy that I will give is in culinary arts. Students are able to decipher the word coconut on a recipe card by using their skills they learned in class. The second example of word implementation strategy that I will give is in art class. Students will be able to figure out the type of paint they were to use on an art project. They were able to find the correct paint by looking at the word on the smartboard and looking at the paint containers. Research on effectiveness. The study that I chose was one about response to intervention. It talked about how they did this study in Jordan about how students were in 4th, 5th, and 6th grades and how they were struggling to read and write. These were students with learning difficulties. They found that some students could read and write the alphabet, but could not read and write words or sentences, while the other students couldn't do any reading or writing. They did this intervention for 45 minutes, 3 times a week for 2 months. They did this study on 60 male students and 60 female students. They found that after they used this type of intervention, it greatly improved the students' reading and writing skills. Their test scores also greatly improved. The second study I chose was about group story mapping strategy. It explains how students with learning disabilities would be able to identify the 5 areas of a story. It goes on to explain how students can visualize what the story is about. They also go on to explain how the teacher plays a role in learning, where the students are struggling and where they are not struggling. There were 4 students from 6th grade that participated in the study. The study showed an increase in students' reading scores. My resources were found on page 2 of the slides, page 10 of the slides, found on page 11 of the slides, and found on page 3 through 8 of the slides.